This week on Physically Spiritual, I have the honor to be joined by Lorraine Bennett as we discuss her new book, The Little Way of Living with Less. Physically Spiritual is my attempt to harmonize and share what I've discovered as I've sought to live healthier, yet revolutionize my spiritual life. I'm captivated by discovering the truth about my body and how it relates to my relationship with God. I'm your host, Andrew Reinhardt. This week, like I said, I have the honor to be joined by Lorraine Bennett. Lorraine has a master's degree in philosophy and has co-authored 6 books with her husband, especially on the temperament that God gave you. She has one book also she wrote on her own, A Year of Grace, 365 Reflections for Caregivers. She created a brand new game, Know Thyself, a game of temperaments. Be great to play with your kids. The Bennetts reside in Northern Virginia and have been married for 45 years. They have 4 adult children and 8 grandchildren. Welcome to the show, Lorraine.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I love this book. It just came out recently. There'll be links in the show notes for everyone to find it, but Sophia Institute Press, if anyone wants to go get it right now before we even start talking. And in this book, it's a beautiful idea of how you put these ideas together. It's really, you might think of it as a Catholic guide to minimalism, pulling in the wisdom of Therese of Lisieux, but also really a rich emphasis on that authentic minimalism is living the virtues that our faith proposes to us. And as I was reading this book, I was just struck by the timeliness of it all. Last season, I had an episode I did on simplicity and living simplicity, and how just being in a hurry and the complexity of life contributes to like a degradation in people's mental health, but also making it difficult to really imitate Christ, who frankly was really simple and wasn't in a hurry and, didn't live this lifestyle that we're all so tied up to in our culture. So reading it, and I always like to start by asking people a little bit about their story, because I think mission and ministry and feeling the Lord's call in our life always comes out of the context. So as I was reading the book, I was just curious, like, what in your life brought you to the point of wanting to share this with the church?
Great question. And, the immediate impetus, actually, what is our own story. But we were, like, for 20 years, we were living in your typical suburban McMansion, way far away from work. And we raised our 4 kids there. And, and then they've grown up and they leave home, and we're sitting in this giant 4,000 square foot place. And my husband says to me, he goes, we are actually living in only 10% of this house. And yet we have all these rooms to clean, and we have all the repairs to do. We have, constant repairs. It's like a money pit, really. And also it's just a drain on your time. And he was saying, he goes, it's really a giant storage unit for our kids' stuff, because they had all their stuff is in our house now, and they don't want to get rid of it. Well, they want us to take care of it, though, but they don't want to have it themselves either in their house. So we're like, well, maybe we should just, downsize. We should kind of jump on that train that is rather popular right now. Minimalism, as you mentioned, downsizing, decluttering, the whole thing. And, so we started that process, and it turns out it's really hard. It's actually very, very difficult to detach from all these material things. And that's what brought me to the thought, I wonder what the virtues underlying this whole process. What are the virtues involved here? And, and that, of course, brought me to St. Therese, because, of course, she has these beautiful virtues that she practiced, and some of the virtues that we talk about, or that I talk about in the book, are practiced by her to a heroic degree. But that was kind of the immediate impetus. And then we had friends who said, well, I would like to do this too, but I don't know how, or I don't know where to start. And so that's kind of sharing our story, but also, drawing on the wisdom of Saint Therese, who is a modern saint.
Yeah, the format of the book I think is great because each chapter you kind of start almost like each chapter focuses on a certain virtue or
Yeah.
theme, and so it begins
Hmm.
with an explanation, but then you have a section at the end of the chapter with
Hmm.
like a little bit of Teresa's story and some of Teresa's
Hmm.
teaching,
Yep.
and then after that you end it with a little tip from like a professional
Yeah.
organizer.
Exactly.
Um,
Professional organizer, since I'm not,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that you start with the church's rich philosophy and theology, insights from science, kind
Hmm.
of exploring the theme. Then you're giving the example of a life of a saint. Some people might say, like, Teresa of Lisieux, really, like she lived in a cloistered monastery. What does she have to teach us about what
Right.
to do with our homes? Um,
Well, great question.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
but then the tip of the organizer always kind of like lands the plane in a really practical way too.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I guess with that question of like, what does Therese really have to teach us about how we live today?
Yeah. That's a great question. Great question. Well, she is a modern saint, so
Mm,
that's one thing. In fact,
yeah,
Pope Pius X called her the greatest modern saints, and she was when she was born, she was actually living in a very, I would say, rather well-to-do middle class. Not she wasn't nobility, but they were well off.
yeah,
She even had she had a servant, and she was raised in this way. So she had beautiful things surrounding her. She lived in a beautiful place, and she understood the allure of material things because she does comment on that throughout in several places in the Story of a Soul, um, where she, even at a very young age, of course, took me, years and years. I'm still clinging to material things, but she, at such a young age, 10 to 14 years old, she realizes that she is called to be a great saint, and she had a greater calling than to be captivated by the beautiful things around her. And she was well aware too of modern inventions. She was really a fascinating personality, and she also had some serious challenges as a young child as well. But she always remained focused on the love of God, that she wanted to love God. She wanted to become a saint. She wanted to enter Carmel at a very young age, at
yeah.
age of 15, which was actually not allowed at the time. And she had to try to get permission. So she went to the bishop, she went to various people, but she actually went also to the Pope, and she she kind of like blurted out her desire to enter Carmel at 15. And he said, well, you have to be obedient. And she said, but please, if you say, Holy Father, that I can do it, then they will let me. And they had to like drag her away. They had to pick her up and take her out. she was a strong-willed saint. And
Mm,
I don't think we always realize that, because you know, she wrote at a time as like, some rather flowery, like lots of flowers and her metaphors. But
yeah,
she was smart. She was very smart, and she was very strong willed.
yeah. I think this is so important because minimalism really only goes like surface deep.
Right. Exactly.
It's like the
Hmm.
pictures on Instagram.
Hmm.
It's like setting up that moment. But what the church is
Right.
inviting us to is like to the depths of our soul. So
Right.
like
Exactly.
what simplicity looks like for that sort of wealthier young woman who has a
Hmm.
servant
Hmm.
versus when she's then in a convent looked really different. Like we have to
Oh
wrestle
yeah.
with the fact that the church has canonized kings and has
Hmm.
canonized people who are wealthy. So simplicity
Right.
doesn't look the same for everyone.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
and so
And
it's really an invitation to how do we apply this to our life?
right.
Yeah.
And all these virtues that she practiced in as part of her little way,
Mm.
for example, detachment, trust, charity, simplicity, as you said, poverty of spirit, and gratitude. And poverty of spirit is one of the big ones. And she said, she had a quote. She said, the only good thing is to love God with all one's heart and to be poor in spirit. And so it's like, what does that even mean? What is poor in spirit? And I think that's where we really see like how we in this day and age can practice the virtues that she is talking about, because we aren't necessarily called to be, running around ragged and barefoot, especially if you have a family, you have to take care of your family. You want to dress them well, and these things. So it's that inner detachment from the material things that we have to strive for. And, we have to understand how to prioritize. We need to always have God as number one in our lives, which she, of course, practiced to perfection.
Yeah, to build on that, what really came through to me in your story and also in the book is how all this is really driven by vocation. Like, I think what our culture presents to us is sort of get what you want. The idea is that minimalism is sort of, having that chic look, that classic, that design, that whatever, but you're still getting whatever you want, right? It's just getting it in a more minimal way.
In a more minimal, you're right. Yeah.
But what we're invited to is that what we have is actually driven by our vocation, by the calling that the Lord has put into your life.
Right.
It's like what you and your husband's home looked like when you're raising your children is different what it looks like now as your children are adults.
That's right.
What Therese had when she was a young girl being raised by an upper middle class family is different than what she was in the convent. So much of this is our ownership, our possession of things is guided by the calling the Lord put on our life versus like our wants, like our desires, our passions.
Exactly. So true. And it's so interesting, speaking about St. Therese and the callings that she felt, because it's so interesting that she writes that she had these desires in her. She said she wanted to be a warrior. She wanted to be a priest. She wanted to be a missionary. She wanted to be a martyr. She wanted to be a doctor of the church. She mentioned that too. But she was like, how can I have all these desires? They must be given to me by God. Well, how am I going to reconcile these longings? And she said, well, at the root of all vocations is love. And that is the vocation that we are all called to. I mean, whether we are, nuns or priests or religious or single or married and with a family, at the root of it, it's all love. So we are called to love. And so how are we going to love those in our lives that God has given us? And in creating a home is part of that, creating a home that is loving and that honors God first. Those are all parts of it.
A lot of what I focus on the show is really where there's harmony between what is discovered through science and then also what the gospel's proposing to us.
Yeah.
And as I was reading the book, this quote on page 102 just like stood out to me. You say, there's actual neuroscientific reason for this anxiety. When the eye sees clutter, the mind sees a problem to be solved. Where does everything go? Our amygdala immediately goes into a fight or flight mode, causing anxiety. But when the space is clear and tidy and contains only the necessary tools, we feel more focused and sharper. And as I read this, it just it resonated with so much of one of my experience, but also what I've come to understand through my own study, that this amygdala, this kind of part of the brain that's really designed to keep us safe, to keep us protected, that fight flight kind of response, that when we're in an environment where that's cluttered, that's messy, that we're always a little bit aroused. We're always a little bit in that sympathetic charge, that that feeling a little insecure, a little uneasy. I was just wondering, hearing that back now from your own book, if you would talk some about like your own experience with that and maybe what it's been like now that you and your husband have gone through this journey together.
Yeah, well, I mean, I absolutely experienced that with clutter, and the neuroscience kind of explained it to me. But if you think about it, if you even extrapolate it to the point of how much stuff we are all surrounded with, and even if it's not, let's say you clear off your desk that you're working on, okay, fine, but all this, the cell phone, all the apps and all the Instagram, the social media, the all the things around, the fact that you can, order something off Amazon and just have it right there in one click. And in our abundance of stuff is actually creating anxiety on a massive scale, I think, in our society. I think that's why, despite all our wealth in this country, why are people less happy now? Why is there more anxiety? And of course there was COVID, and that of course contributed, but people are, there's increase in suicide. Mental health clinics are just packed. I mean, and Catholic mental health clinics as well. Like my husband is a Catholic therapist, and my daughter is a Catholic psychotherapist as well. And, she has a waiting list. I mean, so it's Catholics and non-Catholics. What is it about our world that is causing this anxiety? And I think some of it is the fact that we so easily become attached to so many things. We don't even realize it, how we become attached. It's just like Gollum in the Lord of the Rings, with the ring he's holding on to, and then it starts to possess him. So it's like our possessions begin to possess us.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Honestly, I wrestled with this idea a little bit. One of the things that I thought, maybe didn't make sense is like people oftentimes will experience, relaxation in nature, or like people do like nature bathing, they'll call it, where they go out to like, de-stress or to deal with trauma or something. They go into a natural environment. And I grew up, my parents' house had a couple acres of woods behind it. So I grew up like out in the woods, and frankly, nothing's more cluttered than a forest. There's leaves, there's branches, it's busy when the wind blows through. But it's kind of interesting that in a natural environment, there's something about the complexity and the quote unquote clutter of it that we can neurologically rest in.
Right.
But in like a synthetic environment, there's something about the clutter that causes us unease.
Yeah.
And as I've contemplated that a bit, I'm going to bounce this off. I think it comes down to a fancy Catholic word of teleology, or like the end or the purpose of things, because nature is self-organizing, right? God's created those things with their own internal logic. So when a branch grows in a certain direction, it's because it's trying to get more sunlight or something. But scientists have discovered, even in the complexity of a leaf or something, there's all these different mathematical ratios and things that nature seems to be following underneath the surface. So it's like nature follows its own end and has its own design. But in our homes, when everything's a mess, there's no teleology, there's no end to it, there's no logic to it, there's no design to it or purpose. And that really came out in the book. That part of this is that everything that you have a reason for having it. And it's in a place that it makes sense for its purpose.
Yeah.
And so that kind of like unlocked that apparent contradiction for me a little bit.
Wow. Yeah. I love your analysis of it though, because I hadn't thought of nature. I'd never thought of nature as being cluttered. So I didn't have that moment where like, what's this all about? But yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the purpose and the structure of everything is ordered properly. Yeah. And the problem with once we enter into things with our original sin and everything, so we cause disorder. We create chaos ourselves. There's no chaos. God is not chaotic. God came in to dispel the chaos. He created order, and it's fascinating to think that God created all this. Like, the fact that you can discover the mathematical principles, underlying all these, things of nature is just like mind blowing, actually. Yeah. I'm surprised not everybody doesn't believe in God who discovered these things, but
yeah. And as you talked about that idea of sin causing disorder, it just struck me that part of Adam and Eve's mission in the garden was stewardship. Right? They were supposed to till the garden and by their intervention, actually make nature more fruitful than just how it would have been if it would have just grown wild, so to speak. And it just strikes me that like in our homes, we're exercising a kind of stewardship in a very particular way. And it's a stewardship where everything has an end that transcends myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
What our culture proposes to us is the reason why you get something is because you want something. What
Mm-hmm.
our church proposes to us is the reason why you have something is because it's for the kingdom, it's for others, it's for your vocation, it's for
Right.
mission. So that idea of stewardship, I think, is really rich in this. Of
Mm-hmm.
how does a Catholic really live in this place of simplicity?
Right. Right. And that's the question. And one of the chapters is on order and how
Hmm.
can we order our homes, especially if you have a young family. And so this book is not just for people like my husband and I, who our kids are grown and left home, but it's also for people who are dealing with they have little kids at home, and what kind of order and how can I declutter?
Yeah.
When I've got little kids are like, scattering clutter everywhere,
Hmm.
But, what are the things that we can do to order our homes so that they are properly ordered with the end in mind that you're mentioning, to serve others, to be a place of light, refreshment, and peace.
Yeah.
That's what we want for our homes. And and there's things that we can all do that if you're in the middle with little kids, teaching small children how to pick their things up and put them away, that's a small task where they start to learn about order and
Yeah.
that
This
sort
has
of thing.
been very timely for me. My wife and I had our first son last year.
Mm-hmm.
So my parents are actually literally decluttering their house into our house right now. So like every time they visit, we get another box of stuff.
Oh boy.
So like we have this like inflow, and then when you have kids, it's like everyone wants to express their love by giving you
Mm-hmm.
toys. So we
Mm-hmm.
also have like this constant influx of like toys. And
Mm-hmm.
my wife, God bless her, has like a deeply Franciscan spirit. Like she like feeds on the teaching of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and so she has this like heart for simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
And also, so like we're constantly like filling up boxes for the St. Vincent de Paul in town, and
Mm-hmm.
so like we're trying to like match the inflow with outflow. But this book
Mm-hmm.
definitely came into our life at a providential time because we're on the other
Yeah.
end of that with the young
Yeah.
kids.
It's so true. Yeah. And I do describe like our daughter and son-in-law, and they're grappling with it, and they were very intentional about
Mhm.
what kind of toys they allow in the house. And they also don't want it to be like a house filled with toys. It's not
Yeah.
a house that's supposed to be a toy room. They're trying to keep in mind the purpose of the home.
Mhm.
And so it's very interesting. It's hard to do. And our other son and daughter-in-law, and they're always asking their kids to, okay, let's go through the toys, and the ones you're not playing with, let's give them away to other kids who don't have these toys. So they're teaching their children about charity as well.
Yeah.
So there's so many ways that you can go about this, but it is tough. And I don't think I never would say it's easy,
Yeah. Well, toward the end of the book, I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about gratitude.
Oh,
Just
yes.
toward the end of the book, there's a really rich section on gratitude. You say, spiritual writers and saints have known this for centuries,
Mm-hmm.
yet only now contemporary psychologists are catching up with the fact that being grateful makes us feel happier.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Martin Seligman, the founder and leading proponent of positive psychology, studies the science of happiness. Simple things like being thankful, expressing our gratitude to others, performing acts of kindness, and writing down things we appreciate each day are ways to increase our sense of happiness. We can consciously, intentionally choose to be grateful no matter the circumstances, and therefore increase our joy in life.
Mm-hmm.
And as I read this, I couldn't think of like the scriptures. I couldn't help but think of, when St. Paul says to be joyful always,
Yep.
and how challenging that is for believers.
Mm-hmm.
But will you talk some about like cultivating that sense of gratitude and how that has affected you?
Yeah, well, actually, that is Saint Therese's. Gratitude is at the heart of her little way,
Mm.
because she wrote that being grateful actually draws down more graces upon us, and I think that's an incredible thing to meditate on, because when we are grateful, God well, God blesses us with more. It's like the man who has little, little will be given to him. You know, that scripture
Mm-hmm.
passage, which is very puzzling. Well, she kind of interprets it in terms of grace, you know,
Yeah.
and when we are grateful, it's like the antidote to all this, the anxiety or the overconsumption or the envy that we sometimes experience over other people's material things or whatever. But when we're grateful for what we have, we actually become more joyful. And then we also become peaceful because we're stopping. We're not constantly, revved up to what else do I need? What am I lacking in? What am I missing out on, or whatever it is. And so, yeah, gratitude is absolutely key.
Yeah. And the wisdom of, I think of this from our Catholic tradition too, because
Mm-hmm.
coming out of classical thought, we understand that our emotions are our sense appetites. So everything we're perceiving, hearing, sensing, what have you, is causing a movement inside of us. And
Mm-hmm.
it just strikes me that when we're perceiving something with gratitude, right, that gratitude is something that's going to move that sense appetite, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's so different that if I possess something and I just want more, or I'm not satisfied, in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, that thing becomes an obstacle to me actually receiving the more that I long for.
Exactly.
But if I hold something with a grateful heart, I both
Mm-hmm.
have it and I'm still open to what else the Lord wants to give me.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I was just reading a book where the author was saying, why do we always want to own something? Why do we want to
Hmm.
possess things?
Yeah.
That in and of itself is prevents us from truly relishing the beauty that is around us.
Hmm.
It's like he said, the man who doesn't possess whatever it is, let's say a beautiful garden or whatever, is then able to more readily appreciate all the beauty of nature around him. So
Hmm.
I just thought that was an interesting thing. Like, why does, I mean, I don't think we Catholics would never say it's wrong to possess things, but it's just that in the possession, we tend to so easily slip into becoming overly attached and then disordering our priorities and then not having God as the primary attachment that we are attached to.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I'm curious. Let's say there's somebody listening right now
Mm-hmm.
and they have that feeling like you expressed earlier that they don't possess their things. They feel like their things possess them.
Yeah.
Um, like where do you think would be like a good starting point for them to
Well,
start this process of
yeah.
this detachment, this letting go of the things so that they can be free and
Right.
experience this gratitude?
Well, there's two levels. We want to declutter our souls as well as our homes, but
Hmm. Yeah.
so I think we have to work on both levels. But in terms of the practical, we in the book I do have the practical tips from the professional organizer,
Hmm.
who's not me. I'm not the professional, but one of the things she says is really to recognize how we are attached to the things we own, and and that we've had, and we actually overvalue these things.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
she suggests, like, have a friend, if you're just your house is filled with clutter or whatever, have a friend help you, have the friend hold up the thing and say, do you really need this? Like, and once you kind of have somebody else holding it, you're kind of like, maybe I don't need it. And you can have, that's one of her tips, is to kind of create a distance between ourselves and our things, because some people it's just really hard, and I know I experienced that myself. So
I
holding
love
on to
that.
things.
That's the church, like we're not
Yeah.
meant to do this on our own. It's not just a
Right.
matter of learning more and trying harder, like
Mm-hmm.
the Lord is bringing people into our lives who are going to help set us free. I think of
Mm-hmm.
like the raising of Lazarus, right? The Lord brought him back to life, but then invited the people in his life to roll away the stone and also to unwrap him from what was binding him, the burial
Mm-hmm.
cloths.
Mm-hmm.
So in many ways, that's kind of the image of growing in conversion and community. Yes, the Lord's brought us back, brought us in the sacraments, but there's
Right.
still all this stuff keeping us bound and clinging to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the other people I think the Lord has brought into our life So that's great. Like, go to Sunday Mass this morning, look around the church and ask, Lord, who's the person here who's going to help me get free this week? And invite them over for tea.
You're right.
And
it's beautiful.
And I think that's so beautiful. And so with that, Lorraine, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing this book with the church. I think, anyone who has like an attraction to this idea of minimalism, but also want to integrate with their Catholic faith, I think it's a great read. There's a lot of just like rich, good Catholic spirituality and theology in the book too. All the insights from Therese of Lisieux, the practicals from the organizer. And then also each section ends with reflection questions. So if you want to do it with your small group, maybe you have a women's group or a men's group you want to go through the text with, it's a great tool for that too. So head over to Sophia Institute Press and get your copy, links and everything else in the show notes. With that, Lorraine, anything else you wanted to share with the audience?
I know that is beautiful. I love your analysis of everything here. And I hope that everybody who buys the book can find a little peace in their lives, feel a little de-stressed by decluttering, and that's it.
Well, God bless everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the show this week. Join us on our upcoming season as we finish our series on fatherhood and we look toward our series on food. Everyone head over to Sophia Institute Press and get a copy of the book. God bless everyone. Thank you so much for being a part of Physically Spiritual. Every moment of the show you've watched, know that I'm grateful that you've given your time to this. I'm so passionate about the message that I'm trying to share, and I'm excited about the future of the show. So thank you for every like, every view, every watch, every follow, every comment, every rating you give in the show. And a special thank you to all you that are already members of the Awakened Nation. So thanks again for supporting the show.